So look, what happens after the auction is if that property hasn't reached the reserve, the owner's got a decision to make. Are they going to meet the market on the day with maybe a bidder that they've got there, or are they going to price the property and look at selling it afterwards?
And what is the most likely scenario in a market like we're seeing in Sydney at the moment?
Well, if I'm buying it, look, I'm loving buying these passed-in properties at the moment if they're quality property. They have to really suit a rigorous principled approach to our property buying, though. So I have to really like the property in the first place. If we're buying them passed in, what it means is that I like to be there on auction day. So, I mean, I bought one a couple of weeks ago where it was over $100,000 below the reserve price. But what I saw on that day was that owner wasn't actually willing to meet the market, so we walked away from that auction.
Do you tend to have a bit of an indication around what properties might be passed in or not, or is it just totally random? Do you get a bit of an idea being, involved in this so much?
Great question, Todd. Absolutely. I mean, when we've got a full search running for a client, we're actually all over that market and that landscape of the market. So understanding the pricing of property, the position, so where that agent's positioning that property is going to give away to me whether or not it's going to be passed in or not. If I think something's overquoted or overcooked in this marketplace, there's a good chance it's going to be passed in.
And do you tend to find that some agents tend to do that a little bit more than others? Like, do you have your kind of hit list of agents that you know that these guys tend to overcook it or whatever along the way?
And that's part of watching a market and really understanding a market and using expert advice. We really do that. We see patterns with that with certain agents. It's not something that happens all the time, but you'll see a pattern take place. They've obviously been listing a lot of those properties maybe 6 months before. They're competing with other agents, so they don't want to undersell themselves to that owner, and they need to get that listing. So I do see a little bit of a pattern with that with certain agents at certain times, but it can change as well as the market changes.
Do you get a little surge of excitement when a property's passed in that you're interested in? Do you think right now the negotiation starts?
I get an excitement when I start negotiating, and whether or not it's passed in or we're buying prior, it's really about what I think that property's worth, where it's positioned from the agent, and then the third P on that is how much pain is the vendor in. And by discovering those three principles, then I can actually make a great decision for my clients. But yeah, it's exciting negotiating.
It sounds so cynical to be always looking out for someone else's pain, but obviously you're trying to.
It really does. And I don't mean it to sound like that, because really I'm not looking out for somebody's pain. I'm actually looking out for quality property that's going to perform extremely well above the average for those clients of mine. And it just so happens if that's not marketed correctly, and when I say somebody's pain, let's change it to somebody's pain point. Why are they actually selling? Have they bought before? Are they divorcing? Or do they just not have to sell? And then that can be a really deflating moment,
All right, let's have a look at some examples now. 11 Jackson Street in Balgala in Sydney. Tell us the story behind this property.
Okay, so I bought that property several years ago for some downsizers, and basically what had happened was my downsizers were keen as mustard to buy that property prior, and it was actually in the surge market. The agent was quoting 2.7 plus on it at the time. I said to my clients, look, I did my price research on it. I think it's worth between 2.45 and 2.5. Now, my client was extremely nervous about going into auction with me on that day, but I had a really good feeling that we needed to do that and let the market do the heavy lifting. So what I mean by that is let the owner see that basically the market wasn't prepared to meet their price. So on the day, it really did stall, and we had the highest bid by 2,000 at 2,471. The property passed in on the day, and then I bought it for 2,473, which was really good buying. I'd heard from the agent afterwards that there was 5 other bidders that they were waiting to the next day to buy that property. So being at an auction with an owner that's going through that process, they've seen it pass in, is really a good time to try to put a deal together.
Or to pounce.
Making me sound so vicious. Pain, pounce,
is my estate
let's move that word down to maybe make a great move.
Well, that's what your clients want, though, isn't it? They want when you see an opportunity for you to be able to go and how do you act on that at that time and go and grab it really, really quickly.
And let's have a look at another example where you've done that.
Can I just
in Balmain?
Yeah, and one more thing on that. That client had a budget of 2.7. Left to their own devices, they would have paid over 2.6 beforehand. So.
Right. Now let's look at 9 Booth Street in Balmain. This is another case study, another property where you.
Well, this was fabulous. This one. So basically, this was being sold with number 7 Booth Street, Balmain together, and so it was an expressions of interest with both of them, and they were a failed campaign. So then, what the agent did was he split the 2 properties, and I bought next door as well, and then I started looking at this one. Again, the agent had overcooked it. He was quoting 1.4 on it. I'd worked out pricing that it probably was worth 135 to 1.4. I was the only one on the auction day. Actually, I'll rewind a sec here. I put a low offer in as well because I felt that agent wasn't really giving good market feedback back to his clients, and I felt that was necessary. So I put a 1.1 in prior. Got to auction, I was the only one that turned up because it was actually overpriced, and I bought it for 1.2. And the great story about that property is 4 years later, they sold it for $1.1 million more, so for 2.3 in 2016, without doing any work to it. So it was a 96.2% return in 4 years.
Wow.
I know you love those numbers, Todd.
That's so good. I just love the dog that was in the photo. Yeah. I was looking at it and there's a dog sitting in half the photo.
Yeah, well, he was worth $1 million, really.
That's right.
Yeah, so you can see that in that instance. Now, again, that agent, you're in touch with these agents afterwards, and he was saying that there was a lot of unhappy buyers there. Domain actually reported it was worth 1.4, so already my clients were, 200,000 up. But because it was a very similar market to now in terms of not a lot of people showing up at auctions, auction clearance rates failing, people were really nervous about committing.
So now is a good time, obviously, to looking out for these sorts of bargains.
As long as the principles stack up. So as long as I think that property is a great property on its own. I don't just buy pass-in properties in this market, by the way. I just bought something pre-auction last week for some first home buyers because it was at the right price. And their other buyers were dropping like flies because of finance, and it was just the right level. It was well below what they were originally telling me we had to buy it for prior. So it came down to the price.
And do you have any particular, hunting grounds, going back to this pouncing?
Yeah.
Hunting grounds, right?
You're getting very aggressive with our language, aren't we?
You're really trying to make me into a lion here, aren't you?
So do you have any particular areas where you love to focus on that you find some good value?
Yeah, you're asking some great questions today, Todd. What I do is, I'll talk in the history here, but I was seeing Darlington, for instance, at some stage a few years ago, really being a hotspot. Like, people had just discovered it, and I'd bought into that suburb for some clients prior, and then I realised that so many people were looking at Darlington that Glebe became an opportunity. So you'll see these little micro markets happening around Sydney all the time because there's a little bit of heat in certain other areas, or because of where they're quoting, or because of agents in those areas are not actually educating their clients. So if agents don't educate their clients, the auction clearance rates are going to be lower.
Right, well, Brooke, it's fascinating stuff, and it shows that a lot of people are abandoning Sydney at the moment, but this is the time when you are keener than ever.
Well, can I say that people aren't necessarily abandoning Sydney, and if you look at the stats after auction, things are selling, but they're selling for a lot less than what the owners originally wanted. So, people aren't abandoning it. There's a lot of transactions and deals that we're still doing. It's just that it's taking longer, and we want to be more strategic about how we're buying. We don't have the competition out there anymore.
It just goes to show the value of being counter-cyclical, right? And so as the market starts to cool down, and then you've got to shift and adjust your expectations and your strategy from the vendor's perspective, but also from an investor's perspective, to go and look at the market in a very different way and approach it in a different way. And it's good that you've got all those tools in your tool belt to be able to do that.
100%. Like, I see, one thing that I really watch both at auctions and when I'm negotiating is agent energy. So if I see that, and this is a tip for the viewers there, but if I see an agent that's really wanting to put a deal together prior to auction, I'm really starting, going back to the lioness theory, I'm really starting to go move back into the bushes and just kind of watch again.
Metaphor,
I'm watching between the weeds then to see what's going to take place. So I think, definitely having the pricing, really more than ever, I think having that expert advice is super important, because I wouldn't just go out there and buy pass-in properties because I saw them passed in on a Sunday. They could be 100,000, 200,000 off what they're supposed to be, market value worth at.